The following series contains graphic material and is intended for a mature audience. This podcast contains the impressions and the opinions of the hosts based on the information available to them at the time of this recording.
The main wound is described in my autopsy report. It's a 5 by 1.5 gaping, which means it's split open, deep, sharp force wound. It went through the mid-aspect of the left common carotid artery and the left internal jugular vein. They were trying to convince me that the injuries I saw in the neck, the ones I saw in the back, were all from the horse.
That was board-certified forensic pathologist Dr. Patricia Moore commenting on a Texas murder case unforgettable for its utter tragedy and series of implausible events spanning more than 20 years.
It began on Friday, May 28, 2004, a sun-drenched afternoon in Waller, Texas, a rural town dotted with horse ranches and bluebonnets.
Nancy Merck, a vibrant 58-year-old, went to the Morning View Ranch where she boarded her prized 5-year-old Palomino, Whiskey.
Hours later, an agonized scream emanated from the line of stalls.
A group of women touring the ranch found Nancy Merck lying dead on the stall floor. Her arms were splayed in a Christ-on-cross position as Whiskey paced at the back.
Photos from the scene were graphic and indelible. Nancy had a deep, wide-open wound across the entire left side of her neck.
Blood soaked her blue polo shirt and the surrounding hay.
She had deep slashes across the fingers of her right hand, clearly defensive wounds showing she desperately fought her assailant.
Nancy's jeans were cut down the front from the waist to mid-thigh, exposing her leg. The cut was sharp, not jagged or frayed.
Her underwear had also been cut.
And her boots were off, lying on the stall floor.
Nancy's wounds and the state of her clothing screamed of a brutal fight with a human assailant and a sexual assault.
But at the scene, the sheriff's office concluded she died from a kick by her horse, Whiskey.
Her body was taken to a funeral home.
What if local law enforcement and later the vaunted Texas Rangers were wrong?
I'm TK Masters, corporate espionage operative and former detective. I've assumed dozens of aliases while running domestic and international ops, cracked multi-million-dollar fraud cases, investigated corrupt attorneys, and there are some cases I still can't talk about.
I'm Dr. M, neurosurgeon, attorney, and writer. After performing surgery for many years, I retired my scalpel and went to the dark side. Now, TK and I will use our combined investigative, medical, and legal expertise to analyze the most compelling and complex crime cases.
Together, we are Sleuth
and Surgeon.
This is episode 1 of Two Horse Sleigh.
2 weeks after Nancy Merck's death, DeWayne Charleston, a Waller County Justice of the Peace, signed off on Nancy's death certificate. The cause of death was, in Charleston's words, sharp force injuries of the neck, with the injuries occurring by trample or kick by horse.
In a heartfelt obituary, Nancy's family recounted her extraordinary accomplishments and how tragically she was killed by Whiskey, her favorite show horse.
But this story didn't end there.
Not by a long shot.
In 2017, TK, you began to investigate Nancy Merck's death.
Right. It was 13 years after she died, and I was working on another case in Waller. My client, a wealthy heiress, had been indicted for unlawfully appropriating her boyfriend's horse.
So simply put, she was accused of stealing the animal, and that's a felony in Texas.
An act thoroughly frowned upon by ranch owners, especially in Texas. And during witness interviews for that investigation, people repeatedly asked if I was working on the Nancy Merck case. The story I pieced together was maybe Nancy had not been trampled by her horse. Quite possibly, she was murdered. I was intrigued and determined to solve the mystery of Nancy Merck's death.
So it sounds like a challenging task. 13 years had passed. Where did you begin?
I started by talking with Wayne Wilner, Nancy's husband. Nancy, a divorcee, met Wayne in 1998. They married in 2000 and settled down in Kingwood, Texas, a suburb of Houston. With Wayne, many thought Nancy was the best she could be.
She was also a trailblazer, one of the first nurses in the country to work in intensive coronary care. Later, enamored with technology and computers, Nancy founded 2 software companies.
Wayne described Nancy as a genuinely cheerful lady with an overwhelming passion for life.
She just liked horses. She liked horse people. She was very easy to talk to, very friendly person.
Nancy was also a devoted mother to her 7 children and taught several of them to ride. She had recently retained Dan Flowers, a trainer in saddlebred competition.
Dan was the last known person to see Nancy alive.
During several conversations, Dan told me they talked in Whiskey's stall at about 2 p.m., shortly before she died. A little backstory on Dan. He was establishing his saddlebred business in the Houston area and leased part of the Morning View Ranch, including the stalls, for his clients to board horses and lesson.
The Morning View Ranch on Blinker Road was owned by an attorney and his wife.
They purchased the 55-acre property in November 1998, about 4.5 years before Nancy's death.
The open barn had 24 stalls, each approximately 10 by 12 feet, and a 2-story apartment at the end of the stalls.
There were 2 ranch hands, Jose Luis Cardenas Gonzalez and 15-year-old Jose Fernando Bustos Diaz. They lived in that apartment.
The talk was that the 2 were cousins, or perhaps the teenage Bustos Diaz was Gonzalez's nephew.
In 2004, Waller County, the location of the Morning View Ranch, had a population of about 37,000.
And with that small-town feel and horse ranches, well, you'd think not much happens in Waller, but we went back, and there have been plenty of colorful characters and allegations of corruption.
More high-profile cases than you would imagine. I came across a federal case from 2002. The U.S. Secret Service helped break up a counterfeiting ring.
And then later, in 2008, a public works director pled guilty to conspiring to solicit and accept kickbacks.
We could go on, but that would require an entire episode. So we'll mention just one more. Remember DeWayne Charleston?
Yes, the Justice of the Peace. On the inquest, he said Nancy's death was an accident as a result of whiskey.
A little background on Charleston. He was arrested for theft in 1985. We were unable to determine whether he pled guilty or if there was a trial, but according to the Texas Department of Public Safety, Charleston was convicted of a misdemeanor.
But in a book he wrote titled United States v. Waller County, Then Me, Charleston stated the charges had been dropped by the prosecutor.
In 2003, a year before Nancy's death, Charleston won election to Justice of the Peace in Waller County.
6 years later, in 2009, the government charged J.P. Charleston with conspiracy to commit federal programs fraud, including soliciting and accepting bribes.
After the indictment, Charleston was suspended, and as expected, his judgeship was terminated in 2010 when he pled guilty to the Fed's case.
Charleston received 5 years probation and a fine. We'll learn even more about DeWayne Charleston later, but let's drill down on the sequence of events on May 28, 2004, the day Nancy Merck died.
During her regular 1-hour drives to the ranch, Nancy often phoned one of her children just to chat. As she arrived that morning, Nancy concluded one of those cherished conversations. It would prove to be her final call.
From statements and documents, we learned Amanda Foltz, a Waller resident, and 4 other ladies arranged to meet Dan Flowers at the Morning View Ranch to discuss boarding and lessons.
One of the women approached stall number 19. The gate was closed and latched, but she saw Nancy Merck lying on the stall floor.
The woman opened the gate and Dan held whiskey while one lady, a nurse, checked Nancy for a pulse.
Amanda Foltz made the 911 call at 4:06 p.m.
Paramedic Toby Martin responded to the scene. He found Nancy, her face, hair, and shirt covered with partially dried blood and no pulse.
Later, these same witnesses recounted Nancy's large neck wound and noted her right small finger appeared to be fractured.
They also reported 2 Hispanic ranch hands were present. One helped Dan halter whiskey and remove the horse from the stall.
We reviewed conflicting reports as to whether Whiskey had blood on him.
Which is a point we'll revisit as we get further into the case.
The paramedic covered Nancy's body with a white sheet.
Sergeant Justin Lane and Chief Deputy John Kremer Jr., both from the Waller County Sheriff's Office, arrived, followed by Justice of the Peace DeWayne Charleston.
Sergeant Lane documented bloodstains on both the inside and outside of the gate to the stall.
And you believe that's a significant finding, TK. We'll discuss it more shortly.
Lane lifted the sheet, but it's not clear whether Lane saw her entire body.
It's also unclear whether DeWayne Charleston lifted the sheet or how much he saw.
Sergeant Lane and Chief Deputy Kremer then photographed the scene.
And we shouldn't forget the boots on the stall floor.
Good point. For now, let's get back to the blood Sergeant Lane reported on both sides of the gate, which was latched.
One of the women noted Nancy was a smaller lady, and the gate was high. Her arms weren't long enough to reach over to lock it.
We went to the Morning View Ranch and examined stall number 19.
And came away with the same opinion. It's highly unlikely that Nancy, at 5'4", could have secured the latch on the outside of the gate from inside the stall.
In all probability, the assailant exited the stall, inserted the steel latch pin in the gate, and transferred blood from his hands in the process.
So from the clothing, the wounds, and the blood on the outside of the locked gate, TK, you believe this was a sexual assault and homicide, right?
Absolutely. In my opinion, evidence should have been collected and an autopsy obtained.
But that's not what the Waller County Sheriff's Office did.
There were no records of the blood on the latch being collected for DNA testing or testing for fingerprints or a search for the weapon.
Instead, Nancy's body and the sheet covering her were put in a body bag for transport to the funeral home. It's just hard to fathom.
We should point out that Chief Deputy John Kremer Jr. was 54 years old at the time he worked this scene. According to his LinkedIn profile, he had been employed by the Waller County Sheriff's Office for 16 years prior to Nancy's death. Not a rookie.
Just 4 months before Nancy's death, in January 2004, Chief Deputy Kremer investigated a stabbing. In that case, a man murdered his girlfriend.
I read that report. Kremer conducted a thorough investigation.
But this scene was a different story.
Nancy's wounds and slashed clothing were visible. Did Chief Deputy Kremer look for any other injuries? For example, did he roll her to inspect her back? Relevant points to keep in mind.
And we'll discuss Kremer's theory of the scene later. It's stunning.
It certainly is. But back to the investigation. J.P. Charleston completed an inquest information form.
An inquest is an investigation into the cause and circumstances of a death. Was the death caused by an unlawful act or by an unlawful failure to act?
That afternoon, Charleston wrote on the form the deceased was found in small stall with horse, followed by she died from being trampled or kicked by Whiskey.
At this point, Charleston could have ordered an autopsy, but he didn't.
Right, because according to Charleston's inquest, the manner of death was an accident, not a homicide.
Previously, we mentioned Charleston's book, The United States v. Waller County, Then Me, which he published in 2014, 10 years after Nancy's death.
He wrote about his life and work in Waller County, riding his horse, politics, and Dr. M. He even commented on Inquest.
Charleston attended a training course on Inquest, and in his words, he hadn't been to law school and struggled to remain awake during the 1-hour-long, 45-minute course on conducting inquests.
Charleston also wrote, Of all the things I disliked most about my duties as Justice of the Peace, I most hated conducting inquest. And after 3 years on the job as Justice of the Peace, I still only had the faintest clue of what I was doing. Again, those are his own words.
In my opinion, those are not statements you want to hear from a person responsible for determining the cause and manner of death.
To be fair, at the time of Nancy's death, Charleston had served as a JP for less than 1 year.
Perhaps he was deferring to Kremer, a seasoned investigator.
Maybe. On the Amazon listing for Charleston's book, his bio notes he attended the University of North Texas and did graduate studies at Prairie View A&M University, as well as Dallas Seminary.
But there's no mention in that bio of him graduating from medical school or completing a pathology residency.
So, Dr. M, some listeners may be wondering why a JP and not a physician can declare the manner and cause of death.
Well, the short answer is that's the law in Texas. Counties with a population of more than 2.5 million are required to have a medical examiner, which is a physician. Counties with less than 2.5 million are not required to have a medical examiner. Instead, they can have a JP whose duties include being a coroner.
And there's a significant difference between a medical examiner and a coroner.
There's a big difference. A medical examiner, or ME, must be a physician trained in forensic pathology, but usually a coroner is elected or appointed and is not a physician. In Texas, a JP must be at least 18 years old and fulfill residency and voter registration requirements and have no felonies or ruling of mental incapacitation. That's it. The JP can decide whether an autopsy is necessary and determine a cause of death without ever taking a science class.
That's an incredibly low bar. As an investigator and former detective, I'm persuaded it'd be easier getting away with murder in a county without a medical examiner.
Exactly, and many people would want a pathologist on the case if their loved one died. They'd want a medical professional trained to evaluate the findings at the scene along with the autopsy and laboratory results.
So let's return to the looming question. Why wasn't Nancy's death treated as a homicide that Friday afternoon?
And why wasn't an autopsy ordered?
Remember, the photos from the scene showed a gaping cut on the front of Nancy's neck, a tremendous amount of blood, cuts across the palmar aspect of the right fingers, and the sharply slit pants. These findings support the use of a sharp object, likely a knife.
Well, I did a rotation in forensic pathology in Dallas, Texas. I can tell you, trampling or kicking by a horse usually causes blunt, not sharp injuries. The horse's hoof is firm, but it's dull, so you may see a hoof imprint on the skin, but you won't see the real damage because it's to the internal organs and bones.
Contrary to Waller County's stance, Whiskey's presence in the stall does not mean the horse caused the wounds.
Because being together in the stall is an association. It's not physical evidence like fingerprints or biological material.
And it's certainly not testimonial evidence.
So, back to J.P. Charleston. He had two good options for obtaining an autopsy.
You have Montgomery and Harris counties. They're adjacent to Waller. Both counties had a forensic pathologist, but Charleston sent Nancy's body to Cannon Funeral Home in Waller.
So, no autopsy. Case closed, right?
Well, not so fast, Dr. M. A declaration by the mortician at Cannon Funeral Home leads to a surprising twist. An autopsy was performed, and the results and events which followed are astounding.
As in all criminal matters, persons are considered innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. You should not approach or make contact in any way with any suspect or wanted fugitive named in the content of this program or any related social media site, as they may be dangerous. For more information and photos related to this case, visit our YouTube channel @sleuth&surgeon.